arrogance, fraud, and a stunning downfall. Watch how one man's wealth couldn't save him from justice. The chatter in the courtroom was like a hive buzzing with tension. The air crackled as people packed into the benches, shoulder to shoulder, eyes flicking toward the defendant's table. Whispers spread, each rumor more shocking than the last. Then he walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a charcoal gray designer suit. He carried himself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His slick back hair gleamed under the lights, and he smirked at the crowd, as if they had gathered to admire him, not judge him. Ethan Grayson, the name that had dominated the headlines, looked more like a guest of honor than a man accused of stealing millions from struggling families. But it wasn't his entrance that caught everyone's attention. It was what happened when Judge Monica Lee entered the room. Dressed in her black robe, she moved with quiet authority toward the bench. She didn't need to raise her voice or look at the crowd to demand respect. Her presence alone did that. Her reputation preceded her. A no-nonsense judge, committed to justice above all. The bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Monica Lee," and the crowd stood up. Except for Ethan Grayson, the room fell silent. Eyes shifted to the defendant, who stayed seated, casually flipping through a legal pad as if this was just another trivial inconvenience. His lawyer leaned in, whispering, but Ethan waved him off with a flick of his wrist. Judge Lee paused at the bench, her piercing gaze locked on him. Though her face remained unreadable, the silence grew heavier with each passing moment, disbelief spreading among the crowd. Who did he think he was? But Ethan didn't flinch, wearing a smug expression, almost daring the judge to react. "You may be seated," Judge Lee said, her voice calm but firm. She didn't acknowledge the disrespect, not yet, but the mood in the room had shifted. The tension was now suffocating. And this was just the start. Ethan Grayson was about to learn that even the wealthiest aren't above the law. Grayson wasn't just any rich man. His wealth made headlines. Luxury yachts, mansions on both coasts, private jets, and extravagant parties. His business, Grayson Investments, had once been hailed as a financial success. But beneath the surface, deception thrived. He had promised small business owners and middle-class families a secure future, convincing hundreds to invest their life savings into fraudulent schemes. Retirement accounts, college funds, entire family inheritances gone in the blink of an eye. The fallout was devastating. Families lost their homes. Parents struggled to feed their children, and elderly couples faced the terrifying prospect of poverty in their final years. Ethan saw it all as just business. When investigators finally caught up with him, the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, falsified documents, and testimonies from former employees painted a damning picture. Yet Ethan remained confident. "I've got the best lawyers money can buy," he told reporters outside his Malibu mansion. "This will blow over. It always does." And for a time, it seemed he might be right. His legal team filed motion after motion, delaying the trial for months, portraying him as a misunderstood entrepreneur, a scapegoat for others' failures. But no amount of legal maneuvering could erase the mountain of evidence or the heartbreak of his victims. By the time the trial finally began in San Francisco, the courtroom was packed every day with people seeking justice, or at least something close to it. Among them was Angela Martinez, a widowed mother of 3 who had lost her home after investing with Grayson. Her youngest daughter had to drop out of college. Sitting beside her was Peter Vaughn, a retired firefighter who had spent decades saving for retirement, only to end up living in his brother's spare room. Their stories, along with countless others, were shared in gut-wrenching detail during the trial. Angela's voice trembled as she described the day she realized she couldn't make the mortgage payment. "I begged them not to take the house," she said, tears running down her face, but they didn't care. "My kids had to sleep in our car for 2 weeks. Do you know what that feels like?" Peter's testimony was equally harrowing. "I spent 35 years running into burning buildings," he said, his voice thick with anger. "And this man? He burned my future to the ground without a second thought." But through it all, Ethan sat there unbothered. He often leaned back, scrolling through his phone or whispering jokes to his lawyer. To him, these were just stories, background noise that wouldn't change the outcome he believed was already in his favor. The press couldn't get enough of it. Headlines screamed about his arrogance, his lack of remorse, and the bold disrespect he showed the court. Public opinion turned against him. Public opinion may have been turning against him, but Ethan didn't care. To him, public opinion didn't pay the bills. His lawyer tried to spin the narrative, saying, Mr. Grayson deeply regrets any hardships caused, but he remains confident that the truth will prevail. The truth, however, was that Ethan had no plans to admit guilt. He believed the system would bend in his favor, just like it had done before. But this time, there was one factor Ethan hadn't considered. Judge Monica Lee wasn't like the people he was used to manipulating. The trial was a spectacle. News vans surrounded the courthouse, with reporters fighting for the best view. Inside, the tension grew with every passing day. Witness after witness took the stand, each one adding another piece of evidence to Ethan Grayson's inevitable downfall. But it wasn't just the testimonies that shocked the audience. It was Ethan's attitude. On the third day of the trial, the prosecution presented damning evidence. Emails in which Ethan explicitly instructed his team to falsify records and deceive investors. The courtroom went silent as the prosecutor read his words aloud. Make the numbers look good. We need these fools to sign on the dotted line. The words hung in the air like a bad omen. Angela Martinez, sitting in the front row, shook her head in disbelief. Peter Vaughn clenched his fist, while Ethan, he smirked. The prosecutor turned toward him, her voice sharp. Mr. Grayson, do you recognize this email? Before Ethan could answer, his lawyer intervened. Objection. This has already been addressed in pretrial. Judge Lee raised a hand, her expression calm but authoritative. Overruled. The defendant will answer the question. Ethan leaned into the microphone, his tone laced with arrogance. Yes, I recognize it. But let's not pretend it means what you're suggesting. It's just business talk, something you wouldn't understand. The audience murmured, and Judge Lee's gavel cut through the noise like thunder. Order in the court, she commanded, her voice slicing through the chaos. She fixed Ethan with a steely gaze. Mr. Grayson, I advise you to watch your tone. This is not a business meeting. But Ethan didn't seem fazed. If anything, he looked amused, as if this were all just some elaborate show. As the trial continued, his arrogance grew. He laughed during witness testimonies, rolled his eyes during cross-examinations, and openly whispered to his lawyer during critical moments. The audience watched in disbelief as he treated the courtroom like a stage meant for his performance. Then came the day of Angela Martinez's testimony. She stepped up to the stand, clutching a folded piece of paper, her hands trembling. Her voice was shaky as she began, but her words carried the weight of her suffering. I trusted him, she said, locking eyes with Ethan. I trusted him with everything, and he destroyed my family's future. Ethan didn't even look at her. He lounged in his chair, scrolling through his phone. Your Honor, the prosecutor interrupted, gesturing toward Ethan. The defendant is clearly not paying attention to the witness. All eyes turned to Judge Lee. Her face remained composed, but her eyes blazed with anger. Mr. Grayson, she said firmly, put your phone away now. Ethan glanced up, unfazed. I was just checking something important, he replied, holding up his phone as if to justify himself. Judge Lee's tone sharpened. I said now. For a moment, it looked like he might argue, but eventually he set his phone down. The tension in the room was palpable, but the damage was done. Angela's voice shook with disbelief as she continued, struggling to comprehend Ethan's lack of basic decency. By the end of her testimony, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, except for Ethan's. The prosecution rested its case shortly after, leaving the defense to make their move. Ethan's lawyer tried every tactic in the book, discrediting witnesses, twisting the facts, even painting Ethan as a victim of an overzealous system. But the truth was too overwhelming to deny. Throughout it all, Judge Lee maintained her calm, rarely speaking but always present, her authority palpable. Yet it was clear to everyone in the room that her patience with Ethan's antics was wearing thin. The final day of the trial had arrived. The air in the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters lined the back rows, pens ready, cameras poised. The gallery was full of victims, their faces a mix of anger and hope. All eyes were on Judge Monica Lee as she prepared to announce the sentence. Ethan Grayson sat at the defense table, as relaxed as ever. He even had the nerve to flash a small smile toward the cameras. He didn't look like a man about to face judgment. He looked like someone who believed he had already won. When Judge Lee finally spoke, the room went silent. "Mr. Grayson," she began, her voice steady, "you have been—" Ethan Grayson was found guilty on all counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence against him was undeniable, and the testimonies of his victims clearly depicted the destruction he caused for personal gain. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable as the judge continued, noting his complete lack of remorse and disgraceful behavior throughout the trial. The courtroom murmured in agreement, while Angela Martinez sat in the front row, tightly clasping her hands. Judge Lee's voice turned colder. "Justice, Mr. Grayson, isn't about wealth or power. It's about accountability. And today you will face the consequences of your actions." The room fell silent, and for the first time, Ethan's smirk faded. The judge declared a sentence of 25 years in federal prison without parole. Gasps filled the courtroom. Ethan's face drained of color. This was far from the outcome he'd expected. The judge then ordered the immediate liquidation of Ethan's assets to repay the victims. "Every dollar you stole will be returned to the families you devastated," she said. The courtroom erupted into murmurs of surprise. Angela Martinez covered her face, tears streaming down. Ethan, furious, stood up and shouted, "You can't do this. I'm Ethan Grayson." But the judge's gavel slammed down, silencing him. He was led away, still protesting, as the courtroom burst into applause. Judge Lee addressed the audience, stating that justice had been served and reminding them that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. As the crowd began to leave, one question remained. Would the sentence truly change someone like Ethan Grayson? Outside, reporters caught up with Angela Martinez, who expressed relief but acknowledged that no sentence could undo the damage caused. Peter Vaughn, another victim, remarked that the sentence wasn't just about the years, but about the message that no one is untouchable. Inside her chambers, Judge Lee quietly reflected on the day, not feeling triumph but a steady sense of responsibility. The financial restitution would help the victims rebuild, but the scars left behind would take much longer to heal. As the story of Ethan Grayson's trial spread, it sparked a national conversation about accountability. People shared their own stories, inspired by the verdict. One of the most touching moments came when Angela's daughter, Sophia, wrote a letter to Judge Lee, thanking her for standing up for their family and showing that people like Ethan couldn't get away with hurting others. This trial was more than just a courtroom drama. It was a testament to the resilience of ordinary people, the importance of integrity, and the belief that justice can and should prevail. So, as you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what does accountability mean to you? And in your own life, how can you ensure fairness and justice are not just ideals, but actions? Because in the end, justice is not just the responsibility of the courts, but something we all must strive for every day.